gambling in Havana. I took a little risk. Send lawyers, guns, and money. Dad, get me out of this. Ha!
Thank you very much, Warren. We miss you. We will continue to miss you. So, yeah, we're going to begin today talking about the Manhattan Trump trial. We'll go from there to a new book about the history of posture. Posture as virtue signaling. Body positivity ends at the spine. Do you see what I'm saying? And then towards the end of the show, just because apparently we have a slightly trashy streak, and this is kind of, and I think also just in fairness, because we did cover this franchise when it first began. The Golden Bachelor marriage, you probably heard this right now, and maybe just taking a day off from work to let it settle in, it did not work. So we'll talk a little bit about that. Very excited to have today Mark Joseph Stern. You know, there's a whole industry now of covering Trump trials, and I subscribe to like 8 podcasts that do nothing but keep me up to date on the various twists and turns of the 4 major criminal cases and however many civil cases there are floating around. But when Mark Joseph Stern, a senior writer at Slate, covering courts and law, when he publishes something, I jump right in because I know it's going to be clearly and cogently written, and I will come out of it a better person. He's been with us in the show before. Excited to have him back. Before we bring Mark in, just to sort of set the stage, I think there are sort of 2 ways that people have had doubts about this trial. So get ready, Mr. Reyes, because I'm going to call for the clip. So there's 2 ways that people have had doubts about this trial. One of them is the way that Mark Joseph Stern has had doubts about the trial as a legal analyst, initially maybe having some doubts about the soundness of the case, the provability of the charges. He's going to address that in 2 seconds. But I think the rest of the nation, when I hear them say certain things like, you know, this just doesn't seem like very much, you know, and I'm thinking, geez, it's about a former, you know, it's about a guy trying to become president. He's now a former president, paying hush money to a stripper a porn star, in the context of an election season where he's trying to cover up things about himself so he doesn't lose the election. The fact that doesn't amount to much, and I kind of know what they mean, but it makes me think of this great clip from Broadcast News. This is the character played by Albert Brooks. Aaron is talking to the character Jane, played by Holly Hunter. She's fallen in love with an anchorman, a slick anchorman named Tom, played by William Hurt. A1, Mr. Maestro.
What do you think the devil's going to look like if he's around?
God.
Come on, no one's going to be taken in by a guy with a long, red, pointy tail. Come on, what's he going to sound like? No. I'm semi-serious here.
You're serious?
He will be attractive. He'll be nice and helpful. He'll get a job where he influences a great God-fearing nation. He'll never do an evil thing. He'll never deliberately hurt a living thing. He'll just bit by little bit lower our standards where they're important.
And I've been sort of chewing on that for decades now, that what the devil will do is lower our standards where they're important. So on that uplifting note, Mark Joseph Stern, welcome to our conversation. Welcome back to our show.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, that wasn't your issue, but let's just talk about that issue for a second. You do hear people say that. Well, this doesn't amount to much. And I'm thinking the only reason it doesn't amount to much is because our expectations are so degraded.
Absolutely right. It's only a trivial matter in light of the extraordinary crimes of which Mr. Trump has been accused in other realms, including, stealing classified documents, obstructing an investigation into that theft, attempting to overturn an election. To those who view this as trifling, it's only because there is so much else of which he stands accused. And I guess I can understand that from the point of view of a jaded voter. But that is not how the law works. The law forces people to answer for their crimes, whether or not they seem like they belong on the front page of the Wall Street Journal. And, this crime, once you dig into it and once you really figure out like the scheme here, it was quite grotesque. It was quite sordid. It was not just a mere payoff. It was a campaign finance violation. It was election interference. It was all of the bad stuff that unfortunately washes away when all you read in the headlines is that it involved the porn star.
Right. So just to help people understand or remind people, this is sort of in the 2016 election season. Trump wants to kill a story about an alleged affair with Stormy Daniels, who is, in fact, yes, an adult film actress. The allegation is that his lawyer and fixer, Michael Cohen, is Michael Clayton, was given money to pay off Stormy Daniels. Well, actually, I guess he used his own money at first, and then he was reimbursed, right? Do I have
That's
that
right. So,
Yeah.
and that's a key part of the crime. So he wasn't first paid by Trump. First, Cohen paid Daniels from his own piggy bank, we think. And then over the following months, Trump paid him back, but in doing so, lied about the purpose of the payments. He claimed that he was reimbursing Michael Cohen for some kind of retainer for a legal agreement that did not exist. And in doing so, violated New York record-keeping laws, which make it a crime to lie about to yourself, to the world, to a bank, the purpose of those kinds of payments. And these were large payments. They amounted to hundreds of thousands of dollars in reimbursement in total.
And some of this is taking place against another backdrop, and that is the backdrop of the National Enquirer, which has been kind of a devil's bargain with Trump. David Pecker, their fearless leader, has pretty much put his publication at Trump's disposal, particularly for the purpose of identifying possibly harmful stories and killing them. It's called Catch and Kill. And so it's not just Stormy Daniels. It's a couple of other things. It's a former Playboy Playmate of the Year named Karen McDougal. And it's, I think, a doorman who claims that there's been a love child or something like that that's fathered by Trump. But and that's going to be part of the trial, too. We're going to be reminded of all of that. But yeah, the big question is for a lot of people, and it was a question for you about a year ago. So in order to do all of this, Trump has to falsify business records. That's the allegation against him. In New York State, that's typically a misdemeanor unless you've used that, unless you've done it in the furtherance of a crime, to cover up a crime, something along those lines, in which case it can be kicked up to a felony. And Mark, that's where the election question comes in here, and help us understand that better.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So we're looking at a mere misdemeanor if it's just a records keeping violation. But as you said, if that's done with the intent to commit another crime, then that gets kicked up to a felony offense. It's the lowest level felony under New York law, but it's still a felony, and no one wants to face one of those charges, right? It comes with prison time. It comes with a hefty fine. And so what Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg argues is that Trump, in making this payoff, initially directing it and then reimbursing Michael Cohen and lying about the reimbursements, that this entire scheme violated two separate election laws, one state, one federal. I'll start with the state election law. It's a New York statute that forbids any conspiracy to promote or prevent the election of any person to a public office by unlawful means. The theory there is that, Trump was days away from the 2016 election when all of this was finalized, and he didn't want to lose voters, especially women voters. So he, did this whole scheme in order to ensure that it wouldn't come out before voting on election day. And second, and I think this is actually more important, the district attorney alleges that Trump and Cohen violated the Federal Election Campaign Act by making this unlawful campaign contribution through a shell company to Stormy Daniels at Trump's direction to help him clinch the election by killing the story. And a note that gets lost that I think is really important is that Michael Cohen has already pleaded guilty for this very act in federal court. So he has already pleaded guilty of violating the Federal Election Campaign Act by using this money to try to influence an election without disclosing it, without going through the proper channels. And so, according to the district attorney, and again, I think this is really persuasive, he's saying, yeah, this is all one broad conspiracy. Trump engaged in falsifying business records, and he did so through a scheme that also led to him directing Michael Cohen to make this unlawful payment in violation of federal law. And that is the whole picture that you need to see to understand why this is a series of felony offenses as charged and not just a couple of misdemeanors.
So one thing that I genuinely don't understand, because compared to you, I'm really lazy and I don't read all the briefs and stuff like that, is whether or not Bragg and his team have to effectively convict Trump of this other set of violations. In other words, the felony is falsification of records. It's unclear to me what the status of the election interference is as a crime within the context of the trial. Is it just part of the storyline, or is it actually a set of charges which the jury will weigh and maybe find him guilty of those?
So that's a great question. Bragg does not have to effectively prove that Trump is guilty of these other crimes. All he has to do is prove to the jury that Trump had the intent to commit these other crimes or to aid or conceal the commission of these other crimes. This is straight from the New York statute, which is written very broadly. Intent is a really important issue in the law because actually American law often punishes intent as harshly as it punishes the actual act as if it were carried out. Intended murder is sometimes punished as seriously as actual murder. And here, all that Bragg needs to prove is intent, state of mind. And that, I think, is one reason why Trump wants to go on the stand. We've heard that he wants to testify in his own defense. He wants to say, you know, I had no intent to violate these laws. I didn't even know that they existed. I'm sure his attorneys are counseling him against that because it's generally a bad idea to testify at your own criminal trial. But that lowers the bar for District Attorney Bragg considerably. It means he only has to show that this was the broader scheme, that this was what Trump was trying to do. And in theory, you know, even if he had failed to do it, these charges could still stand because Bragg wants to prove and he thinks will prove that the intent was there all along.
The impaneling of this jury has been really, really interesting already, and they get kind of walked through this questionnaire. They get out. We're going to be devoting an entire episode, I think, on Monday to more about this. But just for the moment, I think there's a little bit of confusion on the part of Americans about what constitutes a fair and impartial juror. And there may be a lot of confusion within that courtroom about what constitutes a fair and impartial juror. I find myself thinking back to something happened. You probably weren't even alive. I don't even know. But in the late 80s, Ollie North was like everywhere. Everybody knew who Oliver North was. He was on just TV all the time. And he was going to trial for some stuff connected to Iran-Contra. And there was a real question about whether in D.C. you could possibly impanel a jury of people who didn't have an opinion about Oliver North. And it struck me at the time that anybody who didn't know who Oliver North was probably like impaired or something, or in an isolation tank. And it seems the way it's kind of unfolding here in New York is though they're acknowledging that everybody knows who Donald Trump is, and people probably have, you know, there's a question about whether having an opinion about him is cause for dismissal, or whether, I mean, some jurors have even tried to insist in this process that they may have opinions about him, but they can be fair and impartial. What light can you shed on this?
So I think that this often comes down to fights between lawyers for both sides, right? Prosecutors and defense over, well, exactly how much prior knowledge can a juror have? As a general principle under the law, it's absolutely fine for a juror to come in with prior knowledge and prior views about a particular defendant, about a particular subject. If they don't have personal direct knowledge, interactions with some kind of private relationship with that person, that would make that bias sort of impossible to overcome. Jurors are often asked whether they can sort of cordon off their past views and render a judgment impartially. And this is where it's important to remember that in the United States, jurors have just one job, and that is to determine whether prosecutors have proved every element of the crime beyond a reasonable doubt. They are not asked, is the defendant a good or bad person? They are not asked, do you think he's sleazy enough to do this? This all ends up being quite formal and technical, and they're given a form where they have to check a box. Was this proved? Was this proved? And go down the list. And so, you know, I think the reason this is tricky, as you noted, is because this is New York City. It's a Democratic-leaning city. Many, if not most, of these jurors are probably going to have some feelings about Trump, some knowledge about him. But the Constitution actually states that criminal trials must take place, with very few exceptions, in the place where the crime allegedly occurred. And here, the onus of the crime allegedly occurred in Manhattan before the election. And so, you know, it doesn't really work for Trump and his lawyers to argue it's inherently unfair. We can't possibly have this in New York. That is where the crime occurred. So that is where the trial must take place. And it is absolutely fine for jurors to come into that courtroom with views on Trump, so long as they avow that they can set those aside. And I'll just say, I know that listeners might sort of be skeptical that that's possible. We have a lot of data on juries that they really do try to do their best here, that they really do try to cleanse their minds of any bias or preconceived notions and to work with the facts that are presented to them and to go down that list of, is this proved or not, and rigorously decide based on what I saw here and nothing else, did the prosecutors carry their burden? So I do think a jury will ultimately be impaneled. I don't think it's impossible to find one. And I think it will be perfectly acceptable if some of those jurors admit that they have some beliefs about Trump, so long as they can set them aside. That under the Sixth Amendment remains a fair jury and a fair trial by Trump's peers.
So there's two more things I want to get to before we run out of time here. The first one is Trump's deportment in all of his trials, and certainly in the civil trials. He was doing stuff. I mean, I think it was Josh Marshall or somebody said, Trump does stuff that like mobsters don't do. Mobsters don't insult their prosecutors and their judges and talk about the family members of judges. I was listening to Trump from a little clip from a rally, I think over the past weekend. He's talking about this trial. He goes, and I got a crooked judge. I'm thinking, nobody does that. And maybe you could say a little bit about this. I mean, there have been gag orders, there have been attempts to restrain him, but it's kind of like saying to your kid, if you take one more raisin, there's going to be trouble. And then he takes the raisin and you don't know what to do. It seems weird to think of placing him under like some kind of custody, forced custody, house arrest. I'm wondering what Judge Merchan's options even are here if he starts to get uppity in court.
So if the gag orders fail, then ultimately the tool that judges have at their disposal is contempt of court, holding a defendant in contempt, requiring them to be essentially incarcerated, usually in jail, until they comply with the order that is lawfully being imposed on them. And I think that the reason why we're having such problems here, Judge Merchan is having such problems, is because this is a unique circumstance where the defendant is not just anyone, not even a powerful mob boss, but the former and possibly future president of the United States. And I guess this sort of skips forward to another question that's looming over this case, which is, well, if the jury finds Trump guilty, if he's convicted, will the judge impose a prison sentence? Is there any circumstance under which Judge Merchan will say you have to be placed behind bars, whether it's in contempt of court or punishment for this crime? And I think nobody knows the answer there because there's never been a situation like this, and because Secret Service has already made it clear that they're sort of struggling to maintain their safety protocols in the context of a state criminal trial. There's a sort of clash between, the federal protection provided by Secret Service and the state rules around court proceedings. And Judge Merchan is caught right in the middle of it. And he's clearly trying so hard to use sort of soft power at his disposal, right? Telling Trump's lawyer, Todd Blanche, you need to get your client under control. He can't be muttering. He can't be using hand gestures to threaten the jury, imposing these gag orders, but letting it slide when Trump violates them. I wish I could tell you what will happen when, the straw breaks the camel's back. I don't, because I don't know what might have been worked out behind the scenes between Secret Service and law enforcement down in this courthouse and in New York State. But I think that if Judge Merchan really wants to hold Trump to account and treat him like any other defendant, then at some point he does have to say, you are now being held in contempt of court, because I guarantee that no other person in that courtroom sitting in the defense chair would ever be given the kind of leeway and latitude to break the rules over and over again that Donald Trump has already been given.
Yeah, and I mean, another part of this is that political speech and political activity, they're pretty privileged under the law. And so anything that impedes Trump's movements, like if you just said, okay, ankle bracelet, you can be in Trump Tower and maybe Mar-a-Lago, that's the only places you can go. You're interrupting his campaign. That's something that I think a judge is going to do as a very, very, very last resort, simply because you think about the status of that speech. Hey, we got time for one more really quick thing. I'm kind of up against a deadline here, but one of the things you wrote about in your excellent article in Slate, which I recommend that people read, you made the point that, whether or not this is the strongest case or Bragg has to maybe connect some dots that are complicated. The other problem is that the other three cases have stalled. And I'd just like to just take a moment to see if you agree. It seems to me that the closest thing to an open and shut case would be the classified documents case. Did he have the documents? Yes. Did he refuse to give them back? Yes. Did he hide them and have his flunkies moving them around when federal agents were looking for them? Yes. Did he share them with people who didn't have classified status? Yes. The only reason this thing is not going to trial, I assume, is because Eileen Cannon, the judge, just doesn't want it to.
I couldn't agree more. I think it's deeply unfortunate because when that indictment came down in the Mar-a-Lago case, I thought this is truly open and shut. You know, they have videos of him and his associates concealing evidence from the federal government. And it's just so obvious that he committed wrongdoing, in my view. But Judge Cannon, who is a Trump appointee, who has issued some extremely wrong-headed and I think lawless orders protecting him in the past, she is slow rolling this trial, using every opportunity to help Donald Trump run out the clock. I personally think she has ambitions to be elevated to the Supreme Court under a second Trump presidency, and she is using this case to try to increase her odds. It is very unfortunate, and that is just another reason why I'm glad New York State has proved less susceptible to political interference in its judiciary, and Judge Merchan has conducted himself beautifully. It is a real split screen with Judge Cannon down in Florida conducting herself in a way that I think is borderline corrupt. And so I'm glad that at least one of these cases is going forward, even if it isn't the one, as you said, that really should be the simplest, easiest to secure a conviction.
All right. Those of you who have nightmares as a result of the idea of Eileen Cannon as a Supreme Court justice should contact Mark Joseph Stern, not me, because I'll be having my own nightmare about it. Mark is the senior writer at Slate covering the courts and the law. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much.
And we'll take a break. People are going to ask you to support this show. Please do it. Please. It's really important. I mean, more important than ever this time.
Slouching toward Betchelor, giving birth to myself again, wondering where my body begins.
All right, so we are going to talk, in fact, about slouching and about posture. We're going to do that with Beth Linker, professor and chair of history and sociology of science at the University of Pennsylvania. Her recently released book is called Slouch: Posture Panic in Modern America. So first of all, Beth Linker, welcome to our show.
Thanks for having me.
So, you know, we live in an era of something called body positivity, kind of the idea that not everybody is exactly the same. You kind of value people for how they look on their own and what their bodies are like. It does seem as though body positivity does stop at the spine. People feel very comfortable telling you that not only are you doing it wrong, they feel comfortable using the word bad. You know, I'm trying to think of other things where you'd feel okay. You wouldn't say you have a bad voice, you have bad hair. I mean, that would be rude, but it's somehow okay to tell somebody they have bad posture. So tell us why that would be.
Yes, that's a fair point. You know, I grew up like everybody else where, you know, I was being told to sit and stand straight. I didn't ask why. I mean, that's the curious thing, right? Like, how many of us ask, well, why? Why should I? I just assumed it was the right thing to do. And then, you know, I went off to get a degree in physical therapy first. And then that command didn't make sense from a physiological or orthopedics point of view. And then when I got my PhD in history, I found it even stranger. So yeah, it's that's what led me to write this book. Like, why, when I tell people that I write a book, that I'm writing a book or have written a book called Slouch, they immediately like sit up straight and say, oh man, I need to really work on my posture, as if I'm sitting in judgment when I'm really not.
Yeah. So there's several, I mean, first of all, one of the things you establish in the book is that this isn't something that started coming up a week ago or a year ago. This is a very, very long running set of prescriptions and proscriptions. And one of the people that we can point to is maybe Darwin. You know, the minute I started reading your book, I was thinking of the Ascent of Man chart, where you see this kind of knuckle dragging chimp or something on the far left, and then gradually a little bit more upright, a little bit more upright, a little bit more upright. And finally we get to Homo sapiens, who is walking pretty much straight up. And that's no accident, right? That is very much part of how Darwin saw this.
That's correct. Yes, before Darwin, most natural philosophers and scientists thought that what distinguished humans from non-humans was brain capacity and intellect, right? But Darwin comes along and says, actually, there's this thing called natural selection and evolution. And the first thing that distinguished humans from non-human animals is upright standing and bipedalism. And you need that before you can even develop intellect or speech or develop speech. So what happens then after Darwin posits this, scientists go out, find fossils to prove that it is true. Physicians and healthcare providers and gym teachers and physical educators get wind of it, and they start to panic because they're looking at the population around them. They're thinking like, whoa, if this is like the one thing that makes us uniquely human, there are a lot of people slouching around. And the thing to keep in mind is that by the early 20th century, that was the height of eugenics. So this was a racialized science that really made a hierarchy between white and non-white, non-white being inferior. They did things like sterilize non-white women in order to control birth, and they kept talking about how we needed to engage in race betterment for the white race. My posture crusaders that I talk about, they're not so much into sterilization, so that's hard eugenics. They're more into the soft eugenics of, if we can just work on being more physically fit, that will make for a better race. And in addition, the physicians start thinking, oh, bad posture means you can acquire diseases more easily. Bad posture leads to back pain. And this was an era in the early 20th century before antibiotics. They knew the germ theory of disease, so tuberculosis was the primary killer at the time. They knew that there was a germ called the tubercle bacillus. They knew that it was transmitted through infection, through contact with other human beings, but there really wasn't an effective treatment. So this is an era when they really focus in on preventative health. Let's try to prevent diseases in the first place. And posture becomes one of those things that they think, if American people can just sit up straight, their lungs will work better, their digestion will work better, and then they won't have all of these diseases.
Pretty quickly, though, it also kind of acquires a velvet lining of morality. And it's there in our language. You talk about upright citizens, upstanding citizens, even the mafia, like stand-up guys. And so there's that idea, and it's transmitted in our culture a little bit. Let's hear a very quick clip from The Princess Diaries. The Queen of Genovia, played by Julie Andrews, is giving her granddaughter princess etiquette lessons. Maestro.
When walking in a crowd, one is under scrutiny all the time. So we don't schlump like this. We drop the shoulders, we think tall, we tuck under, and we transfer the weight from one foot to...
So there you have it. And I guess another part of this is the minute there's a norm established like that, then there are people who want to be delinquent. And so it seems to me that slumping becomes something that like the Sharks and Jets do, or their equivalents from West Side Story. You slump just to prove that you are not in the thrall of authority. I mean, there's sort of a morality and a sociology to posture pretty quickly, Beth.
Yes, that's, I think, always kind of there in the background. I think what's different about in current times or recent times is that there's a medicalization to it as well. And then the medicalization is kind of more, it masquerades around as morality. But yes, you're right. The cool gang, the cool kids will always fight against it and kind of have a slouch. But before Darwin, we should keep in mind that all the etiquette manuals would advise really proper people to have a slight lounge or a slight slump, because to be bolt upright was considered a low class. And so it kind of flips after Darwin, and once posture becomes medicalized in this way. And for sure, about, how people are going to estimate you based on your posture. That is for sure there. And posture assessments are kind of like 20th century phrenology. There are certain scientists that take posture measures and become biological determinists and say, like, if you slouch like that, that means you're lazy. That means you're, not as smart. And in the end, it's really about having this kind of idea of ableism, just that we walk around, a bias that we kind of walk around with.
We're running out of time here, but I think another part of this is if you can't make it, fake it. In your book, you document this going back some ways, that if your posture isn't great, another option you have are things like corsets, things like back braces, things that you might wear under your clothes to make it look like you have good posture. It's sort of the ultimate virtue signaling. Look how straight I'm standing. That must mean I'm a good person. But that might not be coming naturally, right? There might be some aids to get there.
Yes, that's correct. So posture enhancement has been around for a while. JFK wore a corset. And Taylor Swift, just on her Eras tour, just wore a bra, a sports bra that is billed as a posture correcting bra. So capitalistic society is more than willing to help you fix a slouch if you believe that slouching is a problem.
Right. And now social media and influencers and people like that are willing to help you worry about that even more. Beth Linker, fascinating stuff. And you also helped us. We will inform the FCC that we've now mentioned Taylor Swift. We have to do that every day. Beth Linker is professor and chair of history and sociology of science at the University of Pennsylvania. Her new book is Slouch, Posture Panic in Modern America. We'll take a quick break. We'll come back. We'll talk about some very, 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 very sad news involving the Golden Bachelor. And this is public radio. We're talking about that,
Stand up straight now, Ethiopians, and fight on the Babylon Day. All the people talk Babylon won't cooperate. All them do is just leave the children.
We are back. Now it is time to say some important things. One of them is that the technical producer of today's show is the maestro, Dylan Reyes. McCusker the Whiz Kid, I always get that wrong. McCusker the Wonder Kid and her bad cat, Penelope, are the producers of this particular episode. Our senior producer is Lily Tyson. And yes, we are about to make everybody very sad. Although I assume you already know this. You may have taken a day off from work just to kind of deal with your own feelings about it. But earlier this year we did do, or maybe it was, I think it was earlier this year, we did do an episode of The Nose where we talked very specifically about the Golden Bachelor. This is exactly what it sounds like, a version of The Bachelor or The Bachelorette, but for people, well, to put it personally, people my age, we had a winning couple, as is the case, I think, with this program. And then on Good Morning America, some very bad news was announced. Maestro, let's play C1 right now.
Teresa and I have had a number of heart-to-heart conversations, and we've looked closely at our situation, our living situation, and so forth. And we've kind of come to the conclusion mutually that it's probably time for us to dissolve our marriage.
Get a divorce.
Yes.
3 months after getting married.
Yes.
So, really driving that point home there, Good Morning America host. Kay Brown joins us now, host of the Bachelor Recap podcast, The Betchelor. That's B-E-T. See what they're doing there. So, Kay Brown, first of all, welcome to our conversation.
Yeah, happy to be back. Very excited to be here.
You're excited, but let's stipulate that you're wearing black right now. This is a time of mourning.
Of course,
So this is, among other things, I mean, obviously the Golden Bachelor set all kinds of new watermarks just for what it was, but now it set another watermark, right? This is the most short-lived post-Bachelor franchise marriage, right?
Yeah, I believe it is, which I'm a little shocked. I'm not going to lie to you. I'm a little shocked.
Are you shocked that they got divorced, or are you shocked that this is the most short-lived, given the fragility of some of the pairings that you've seen so far?
Yeah, I think I'm shocked that it's the most short-lived that we've had, especially, we have the younger couples who we take a little less seriously. They end up, a lot of them end up getting married, or they meet somebody on Paradise and they end up getting married. But having the couples that Gary and Teresa, we were really rooting for them. And we thought, okay, this is it. They've been through the relationships. They must know what they're doing. And then seeing this end in 3 months is really heartbreaking.
I think in some ways, the explanation for breaking up was the explanation for getting married very quickly, too. Gary at that time, or maybe it was Teresa, I think it was Gary, or maybe they both said, at our age, there's no time to waste. So they got married in January. Well, as somebody who's going to turn 70 this year, I can say at our age, there's no time to waste in a relationship that you know is not going to work. So, I mean,
Right.
I assume, if you're some hot 26-year-old or something and you just got married as a result of The Bachelor or The Bachelorette, you could give it a year or two, see if it improves. I feel like when you're at that age, you're not going to do that. You really are going to maybe pull the ripcord a little sooner.
It makes sense, but it's like I wonder about their excuse, which I'm not like saying it's an excuse and they were trying to like get out of it, but like, how do you not talk about the living situation before you walk down the aisle? I feel like that's something, we should have talked about and decided before that. And I mean, I'm 35, but in my head, if I'm not like at least living with the person or have a plan to live with the person by the time I'm walking down the aisle, I think that's an issue. So somebody at 70 or, 65 and they're not thinking about that, I'm confused.
Yeah. So the explanation they gave on Good Morning America, it didn't really hold up very well. They just said that they've been looking at houses in New Jersey and is it North Carolina?
Charleston.
Yeah, Charleston.
Yeah.
Charleston and New Jersey. And they just couldn't find anything they liked. So they're getting divorced. That's what people do when they can't agree on a home. That doesn't really seem to make a heck of a lot of sense.
No, it doesn't hold up to me. And then if you think about like the timelines of everything, 3 months that they had to, talk about this, decide this, plan with ABC, go in Good Morning, like talk to Good Morning America, figure out this interview. It was probably less than that. Like this was such a quick turnaround.
And the other thing that has surprised me is that not too long after this wonderful couple was introduced to us, there was some reporting in the Hollywood Reporter that Gary, who, the whole premise of the show was that Gary was such a catch. He was very close to his feelings, he had access to his emotions. He seemed very devoted to his dead wife and, just determined to kind of almost make the litmus test be someone he was as enamored of as he was of his dead wife. And he just seemed like, this really great guy and nice enough looking fellow. But then the Hollywood Reporter found out. And you'd kind of think the people who make The Bachelor would have found this out before the Hollywood Reporter did, that there was just a lot of stuff about him that he said that wasn't exactly true.
I think, this is total speculation, but I think that ABC or casting, whoever, I think they knew about this, but why would we go looking up the backstory of some 70-year-old guy? Like that's not at the top of mind for me. So I think they probably knew this stuff. They do a lot of research on the people that they're casting, especially when it's going to be a brand new show. They can't really, you can't mess this up. So I think they knew about it and they just didn't think that people were going to dive that deep into it.
Right. And so, when we say dug stuff up, some of it was about his occupation. He was supposedly a retired restaurateur or something like that. It turns out that whatever restaurant he owned would have been more of a kind of a franchisee kind of thing. And it was a long time ago. And since then, he's been doing stuff like installing jacuzzis and things that sound a lot less, like sort of something Humphrey Bogart would do in Casablanca. And the other part of it was that he had espoused this incredible devotion to his dead wife, and it seems as though he kind of put himself back on the market pretty fast after that. It wasn't like he had waited forever to honor her memory.
Yeah, about the job situation, honestly, I think that is so forgivable because, again, if somebody's looking at my LinkedIn when I'm 70 years old and still judging what my jobs have been, that's kind of, I feel like that's reaching. But with the moving on so quickly, I do agree that was a quick turnaround, especially, in the Hollywood Reporter talking about the woman that he was with and how it happened. But I guess grieving is different in every situation. And it's hard to be in that position because I've never been in that position. But thinking about it, it is really difficult too. It's like, oh, well, I guess it was a lot easier to move on. But I don't know if that's necessarily the case because it clearly didn't work out between the two of them anyways.
All right. You're obviously a very big-hearted and forgiving person.
I'm trying to be.
So last quick question. I mean, one way of reacting to this is, wow, this is a big disaster. That's made me think twice about doing this in the future. I've only got about a minute left, but I assume this is great for the Golden Bachelor. They got back on Good Morning America again.
Yeah, and they did announce that they were going to have a Golden Bachelorette, which I think is going to be very exciting. But I am curious how now that seeing that people are digging up these backgrounds and are really looking into these people who are older, I wonder how are they going to find, 20, 25 men that haven't done anything weird, that haven't, had some sort of past. I am very cautious about this upcoming season of The Golden Bachelorette.
This is exactly how we began this show. The goal of Satan is to lower our standards. All right, we have to take a quick break. Thanks to Kay Brown, host of the Betchelor. And we're going to ask you to support this station and this show by making a donation right now. Make a pledge when these nice people ask you to.
But you gotta let go, gotta do it from scratch. Take a long, deep breath, go back to your sources. A little vacation, which is all about forgetting, right? Right.